Hi, I'm the history guy. I have a degree in history. I love history. And if you love history too, then this is the channel for you. If you studied history in high school, you might have heard that Ferdinand Magellan was the first person to circumnavigate the globe. And if that's what you heard or that's what you remember, you would be wrong. While Magellan's expedition from 1519 to 1522 was the first to circumnavigate the globe, Magellan himself didn't make it the whole way. He actually died in 1521 in the kingdom of Mactan, which is part of the modern-day country of the Philippines. And it was another one of his officers, Juan Sebastian Elcano, who actually completed the circumnavigation of the globe. But it's not just interesting that Magellan didn't make it the whole way and that people in the West don't seem to remember that Magellan didn't make it the whole way, because it's important why Magellan didn't make it the whole way. Because in the Philippines, the death of Ferdinand Magellan is considered one of the most important events in history. And here in the West, we really have no idea that he even died. And we really should know how and why he died, because it provides a really great lesson on the nature of the era of discovery and conquest. And it explains a lot about world politics today. And so today we are going to remember the well-remembered in the Philippines and forgotten in the Western world 1521 Battle of Mactan. To understand how Magellan came to die in the Philippine Islands, you have to understand a little bit about how Magellan came to be in the Philippine Islands. And that all has to do with a treaty that was signed in 1494 between the Kingdom of Portugal and the Kingdom of Castile in Spain. And essentially the purpose of the treaty was to divide up the New World between Portugal and Spain. Now understand, this treaty didn't pay any attention to the interests of, say, other European countries in the New World, and it certainly didn't pay any attention to the interests of hundreds of millions of indigenous people who thought of the New World as, home, but it was intended to reduce conflict between Spain and Portugal over the new lands. And essentially what the treaty did is it drew a line down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and said Portugal gets east and Spain gets west. And that offered a unique challenge for Spain, because Spain wanted access to the Spice Islands, but because of the treaty they couldn't do that by going around Africa. And so what they really needed was a route that would go around the Americas, the lands that were discovered by Columbus, and go westerly to the Spice Islands, a western route to the Spice Islands. And that's where Ferdinand Magellan comes in. Now, ironically, Magellan himself was Portuguese, but he brought a proposal to the King of Spain, Charles I, to lead an expedition to identify the western route. And Charles I agreed to fund an expedition that included 5 ships and about 270 sailors. And that expedition kicked off in August of 1519. After spending the winter in South America, Magellan discovered the strait that allows you to go around South America, that's now called the Strait of Magellan, in November of 1520. And by then he was already down to just 3 ships. One had been wrecked, one had mutinied and returned back to Spain. And so those 3 ships went through the Strait of Magellan, and by November 28th, they were the first Europeans to enter the Pacific Ocean. After being the first Europeans to visit the island of Guam, they went on, and by March 21st of 1521 became the first Europeans in the Philippine Island. And there Magellan found an ally in the form of Humabon, who was the Raja or king of the Rajanate of Sipu, which was in the southern part of the Philippine Islands. And Raja Humabon and his wife converted to Catholicism, the first to do so in the Philippines. And then the Raja sent an order throughout his kingdom saying that everybody should convert to Catholicism and that they should send food and supplies for Magellan's ships. Well, the order was generally followed except for just one of Humabon's chieftains, one of the Datu, or the chieftains of the island of Mactan, whose name was Lapu-Lapu. And Lapu-Lapu said that he would not convert to Catholicism and that he would not follow the orders of the King of Spain. And so Humabon suggested that Magellan take his ships over to Mactan and force Lapu-Lapu to submit. It's clear that Magellan was overconfident, because he took with him just 60 men, and even though he had warriors of Humabon with him, he told them to stay in the ships because he wanted them to witness the power of his European weapons. The actual battle was on April 27th, and because he left a few of his men to guard his boats, Magellan only had 49 men with him, whereas Lapu-Lapu had 1,500 warriors. And we don't know much about Lapu-Lapu, but it turns out that he was a pretty brilliant tactician, or at least he had Magellan's strengths figured out. I mean, first of all, on the island, there was so much coral and rock out in the ocean that Magellan's ships could not get close enough to use their cannon, and that already denied Magellan some of his most powerful weapons. But then Lapu-Lapu kept his warriors at a good enough distance that Magellan's men with their muskets and crossbows couldn't do a lot of damage, and he waited to charge until they were almost out of ammunition. When his 1,500 men didn't charge, Lapu-Lapu told them, stab at the legs, because while the Spanish wore good armor, they didn't armor their legs. And most importantly, Lapu-Lapu told them, kill the leader, so that they all charged Magellan, because Lapu-Lapu knew that the whole attack would fail if Magellan fell. And so 1,500 guys came to stab Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan was swamped and killed. Well, many of his troops got away, but they lost about 14 other troops in the battle. And why a battle where only 14 died doesn't seem like a big deal. The actual loss of Magellan delayed the Spanish dominance of the Philippines by around 40 years. With the loss of so many people in the battle, the expedition didn't have enough sailors left to operate 3 ships, so one of the ships was abandoned. One tried to return home via the Pacific route, the way that they came, and one decided to try to return home via the Indian Ocean and around the Horn of Africa, and that's the only ship that made it back. Of the 271 sailors that had left on the expedition, there were only 18 on that boat that returned to Spain with Juan Sebastian Elcano that had circumnavigated the globe. We really don't know what happened to Lapu-Lapu. There's no record of his death, but according to local legend, he didn't die. He turned into a stone, and local fishermen still throw coins at a vaguely human-shaped rock in the ocean there to thank Lapu-Lapu for the privilege of fishing in his waters. The Battle of Mactan is important for a few different reasons, starting, of course, with the death of Ferdinand Magellan, who was a very powerful personality and who clearly would have done more in his life if he hadn't ended up on the end of a spear. It also represents the errors that were commonly made by Europeans in the age of discovery and conquest, that arrogance, that underestimating the local population, that overestimating the power of European arms, and that inability or unwillingness to understand local customs and power structures. And those errors would be repeated again and again in the Far East, in the Pacific, in Africa, and in South America. But most of all, the Battle of Mactan is important for the people of the Philippine Islands. I mean, immediately one of the effects was it was many years before Spain could mount another meaningful expedition to the Philippine Islands. But in the long run, Lapu-Lapu has retroactively become the symbol of Philippine resistance to foreign rule, which has really been a cause in the Philippine Islands since the 16th century. And that's a little bit anachronistic because the fight, the Battle of Mactan, was really over local power structures in the kingdom, but the reason that Lapu-Lapu resisted was because he did not want to have a European religion forced on him. And so he is this symbol for people who fight the age of exploration and conquest. There are several statues of Lapu-Lapu. There are the main city in Mactan is named Lapu-Lapu City. Lapu-Lapu's head was on the 1 centavo coin in the 1960s and 1970s. And the people of Mactan still annually reenact the Battle of Mactan. And that's a real irony, because here we have Ferdinand Magellan, who is a man whose navigational skills were so important that there are several geographic features on Earth named after Ferdinand Magellan, but there are actually craters on the moon and on Mars that are named after Ferdinand Magellan, and 2 of the closest galaxies to the Earth are named after Ferdinand Magellan, and yet his death is a symbol to people who oppose everything that his navigational skills brought, which was the theft of their land and their culture. And that irony alone is enough reason for you to know about the 1521 Battle of Mactan. I'm the History Guy. Hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. If you did enjoy it, then go ahead and click that thumbs up button that's there on your left. If you have any questions or comments, then please feel free to write those in the comment section and I will be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 more minutes of forgotten history, then click the subscribe button that's there on your right.